I love the readings we have during Easter time for so many reasons. But especially the fact that we get these wonderful insights into that early church, those first disciples of Christ, and how they were dealing with the reality that Christ had died. And now they are gradually coming to the realization that he had risen from the dead and the impact that was going to have on them. Since we're so far removed from those days, it's easy for us to fall into a kind of trap and say, well, okay, we just celebrated Easter, fine, we get it, and now the 12 apostles just go off and everything's hunky-dory, they pick up where they're supposed to, and off they go. In a way, we kind of expect that first reading. There's Peter and the disciples getting called into court, and they're courageous. We told you not to preach that name. Well, we're going to do it anyway. What are you going to do? And we see that courageous group. But the Gospels still remind us of the earlier group, before they come to that courage that they show later. And I think, at least speaking for myself, I find those stories to be so moving and so applicable to where we often are. As we try to sort things out, what does it mean in my life in very concrete terms to say, Jesus the Christ, whom I love and follow and adore, has risen from the dead? What difference is that supposed to make in my life today? Now, consider the stories that we get told in the gospel today. It starts off, now remember, they're still within a day or two of the resurrection. So they've started with the empty tomb. They're still trying to sort out the empty tomb bit. Then they've had the two appearances of Christ in the upper room, where they're still locked in, scared to death. And if you remember, we had the story of Thomas, the same Thomas we hear about in the first reading today, the doubting Thomas. But notice, they've still stayed in the locked room. They still haven't left it. And in John's gospel that we've been reading from, he's already sent the Spirit. In a way, their Pentecost has already happened, and they're still frightened. But at the beginning of the gospel today, Peter finally has had enough of hiding. I'm going fishing. I'm getting out of this upper room. I'm going to try to figure out how I live the rest of my life, day by day, following all of what's happened. Somehow, we've got to get back to living a normal life, if that's possible. So I'm going fishing. And 7 of the other 12 say, we'll go with you. And if the people arrest us, if they haul us into court, if they kill us, well, so be it, but we're not doing it locked up anymore. And that's when Jesus appears to them again. Now, I want to cut to the end of the gospel. A lot has been written and reflected on that. Why does Jesus challenge Peter 3 times? Well, it's pretty obvious why. Peter has denied him 3 times. And so for each time Peter denied Christ, Christ is asking him again, are you sure? Are you sure you love me? But what the significance is goes beyond that. It's more than just rehabilitating Peter. This gives us something we can sink our teeth into. Let me come back to that in a second. Before I came out to California a couple of years ago, I was teaching full-time at a university in Florida. And some of the administrators would drive us crazy. That's what administrators do in schools. They drive the rest of us crazy. But one of the things the administrators kept challenging us on our syllabi was, how are you measuring results? What kind of metrics are you using? When you say you hope in your class your students will be able to do whatever they're supposed to do, how do you measure that? What's the metric you're going to apply? And for those of us who teach philosophy or theology, we get all uppity about that. Oh, you can't do that in our class. This isn't a science class. How do you measure conversion? We get the metric in the gospel. How do you measure conversion? St. John tells us very clearly. If we love God, if we love Christ, it's measured by how much we take care of other people. It's all about the service. That's how we demonstrate our love. We don't demonstrate our love just by saying, I love Jesus. That's a good first step. But if you would prove it, you would serve. That's the metric. St. John is going to tell us many times, over and over again. Remember, it's St. John that has the foot washing. If you would believe in Christ, if you would profess your love in Christ, it's all about pouring out yourself. It's all about that kenosis we talked about during Holy Week. That's the metric. Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Tend my flock. Do you love me? Feed the sheep. Holy Thursday, as many of us have seen, Pope Francis went to that youth correctional facility. Before he washed the feet of those kids, he gave a beautiful little homily. And if you get a chance to watch it on YouTube, do. Because he does something kind of interesting. He's got a text. You can see him reading from a prepared text. And then he puts the text down and speaks from his heart. And what he says when he puts the text down is, I come here as your bishop, which means I am your servant. I come here as your bishop, which means I am here as your servant. And he washes their feet. So the question is for each one of us, as we emerge, as we celebrate Easter, as we try to find our way back to ordinary time, the same question for us. Bill, Tom, Joe, Pete, Bob, Mary, Kathy, do you love me? Feed my lambs. Tend my flock. Feed the sheep.